Captain Elias Kane bore the weight of years like a silent mantle. His frame, once forged by battle, now sagged under scars carved deep into sinew and bone. Each line etched upon his weathered face whispered campaigns fought in forgotten star systems, where suns burned out and comrades never returned. The galaxy had marched past him, replacing grit with steel, patience with programming, and blood with enhancements. He was a relic left behind, wandering among a new breed of warriors bred for speed and precision, their flesh bound with circuits and alien grafts. Once his name carried weight. Now it carried dust. He knew the bitterness of irrelevance, yet a strange dignity clung to him. Though dismissed, though mocked, he refused to let time strip him of the quiet knowledge that endurance, not augmentation, had always been humanity's sharpest weapon. Zereth Prime stretched wide and unyielding, a frontier world carved from jagged stone and restless winds. Its skies shimmer with unstable storms, its soil cracked under the strain of settlement. Yet life pressed forward. Human outposts clung stubbornly to ridges and valleys, welding steel towers into the rock like fragile monuments of survival. Beside them rose the garrisons of the Threxel, reptilian structures of scale-like stone, built for ceremony as much as function. Here, alliance wore thin, patched together by necessity and sharpened by pride. Amid the swirl of ambition and distrust, Elias lived in quiet obscurity. He worked as a laborer among settlers and soldiers, his hands calloused from crates and tools rather than weapons. To many, he was invisible, a shadow on the periphery of glory. Yet beneath that shadow, his eyes missed nothing, and his silence carried more history than most could fathom. The barracks swelled with voices of the young. Soldiers gleamed with cybernetic arms that pulsed faint blue beneath skin. Neural uplinks flickered at their temples, feeding them reflexes faster than thought. Some boasted bioengineered muscle, sinews strengthened by alien compounds traded in uneasy treaties. To them, battle was a proving ground, an arena where superiority was measured in augments, not endurance. Elias stood among them like a rusted blade in a field of plasma rifles. His back hunched under years rather than alloy. His hands trembled from age rather than recoil. Laughter followed him often, sharp and merciless, as if his presence alone reminded them of weakness. Yet when drills failed or enhancements glitched, his voice cut through chaos with calm precision, recalling tactics written before their time. They ignored him still, blind to the quiet resilience that no machine could replicate, blind to the power that did not glitter. Humans prided themselves on pragmatism. Bending rules of survival demanded it. The Threxel lived by honor, their reptilian frames towering, their scales marked with ceremonial scars. To them, weakness was shame, strength the only currency worth bearing. Their alliance had been born not of trust but desperation, forged in blood when the Vorix threatened all. Though banners flew side by side, eyes often narrowed in suspicion. Whispers of betrayal rippled through camps like smoke. Elias remembered when unity had seemed possible, when shared sacrifice had tempered pride. Now, he watched as even his own kind dismissed him. Their pragmatism no longer stretched wide enough to include the old. Among the Threxel, he was worse than invisible. He was pitiful, a shell paraded as proof of fragility. Between the two species, the rift deepened. Between ideals of honor and survival, cracks widened, and the galaxy's silence grew ever more dangerous. The Vorix were not whispers anymore. They were storm clouds gathering on the horizon of stars. Their hive mind devoured systems with mechanical hunger, each world stripped to husk and bone. Reports came in fragments. Fleets overwhelmed. Colonies silenced mid-transmission. Defenders drowned beneath oceans of chitinous bodies. Numbers meant nothing to them. The swarm was numberless. Adaptation was their weapon, evolving tactics within hours, shifting formations like water-filling cracks. To speak of them was to conjure dread, yet all lingered too, for they were the purest form of survival made flesh. On Zereth Prime, murmurs spread through soldiers' ranks. The swarm was coming. Fear pressed against the walls of both human and Threxel hearts, though neither admitted it aloud. Elias had faced them once. Long ago, the memory gnawed at him. How close humanity had come to breaking then, and how much weaker their alliance seemed now, fractured before the storm. In council halls lit by cold light, generals studied holographic maps with impatience. Elias' presence was tolerated as formality, a courtesy extended to an artifact. General Verath, scaled and scarred, towered above all, his voice sharp as blade edge. He dismissed Elias openly, calling him slow, fragile, a burden to men of speed and strength. Laughter rippled through younger officers, both human and Threxel, their mockery unmasked. Old strategies Elias offered were brushed aside as relics of primitive wars. His chest tightened with humiliation, yet he did not lash out. Silence was his shield. He had learned long ago that dignity did not require acknowledgement. Still, the sting remained, and in quiet moments, he wondered if perhaps they were right. Perhaps he was obsolete. Yet beneath the scorn, something smoldered within him. A stubborn ember, a defiance forged from years of being underestimated and surviving nonetheless. When conscription orders came, they were stripped of honor. He was not given a rifle, not trusted with command, not even granted a squad. Instead, he was assigned logistics, hauling crates and supplies like a beast of burden. His name on the roster was followed by the word support, a cruel echo of irrelevance. To others, it was insult. To Elias, it was one more wound among many. He accepted without protest, though bitterness pressed against his ribs like stone. As he hefted the weight of munitions, as others smirked at the spectacle of a soldier reduced to mule, he felt the stirrings of something old. It was not pride. Pride had long since burned away. It was endurance, the raw, stubborn refusal to break. If this was a role fate gave him, he would bear it, and when the storm arrived, he would still be standing. The first warning came not from alarms, but from the sky itself. Clouds parted into rivers of chitin and wings, blotting out Zereth Prime's pale sun. The Vorik swarm poured from orbit like a living storm, descending in waves that shrieked against the air. Every wing beat carried terror. Every shadow promised death. The defenders, both human and Threxel, stared upward with awe curdling into dread. Energy cannons roared, and railguns spat molten metal into the heavens. Yet the swarm absorbed the fire, their endless bodies twisting and folding like a tide against cliffs. It was not an army. It was hunger given shape, a tide that refused to end. Soldiers tightened grips on rifles, claws flexed on blades, and still their hearts faltered. Training meant little before infinity. For the first time in years, Elias Cain felt his breath catch, not from age, but from the sheer majesty of annihilation descending. The first clash came like glass shattering. Vorik slammed into trenches and fortifications, their bodies armored in natural plating that split steel with ease. Enhanced humans fired in disciplined bursts, yet the swarm pressed on, climbing over corpses of their own with perfect indifference. The Threxel, roaring oaths of honor, met them blade to claw, their martial pride drowned in acid blood and endless screeches. Formation broke within minutes. The battlefield became chaos, a storm of teeth and gunfire, where courage dissolved into desperation. Cybernetics sparked, augments failed, and warriors genetically engineered for superiority were dragged into the dust. Pride crumbled beneath the swarm's sheer persistence. The Alliance, fragile even in peace, faltered as soldiers shouted in fractured tongues, retreating in pockets. Elias, hauling crates at the rear, felt the tremor ripple through ranks. He had seen this collapse before, when men believed technology could replace will. Panic spread faster than any swarm. Amid the storm, a figure loomed, General Verath, the pinnacle of Threxel might. His scales shimmered with ceremonial scars. His twin blades danced like silver lightning. Voriks fell before him in heaps, their shrieks filling the air with rage. For a moment, he was unbreakable. Then the tide shifted. A Vorik's behemoth surged from the swarm, its bulk crushing through walls of stone. Acid spit arced across the field, searing flesh and armor alike. Verath struck hard, severing limbs, but the beast's claw caught him, tearing through armor into bone. The general staggered, blood dark against emerald scales. His massive frame fell heavy, too large to retreat with speed, too injured to rise again. Around him, Voriks closed in, sensing weakness with predatory precision. The sight of their greatest warrior brought low-sent ripples of despair through both human and Threxel ranks. If Veyrath could fall, what chance did anyone else have? Fear spread like fire. Younger soldiers glanced once at the fallen general, then twice at the advancing swarm, and chose survival. Humans disengaged, voices cracking with panic as they fled. Threxel, bound by honor and words but not in terror, broke formation, abandoning their leader to the maw. Some hesitated, shame flickering in their eyes, but shame weighed less than survival when death screamed in claws and acid. Veyrath roared for aid, but his voice was drowned by gunfire and fear. Elias watched, heart-heavy. He saw the dishonor in Threxel's eyes, the shame in human faces, the collapse of everything alliances claimed to stand for. The battlefield was no longer soldiers versus swarm. It was a young betraying the old, strength abandoning strength. And amid it all, the general's massive form bled into the soil, pride unraveling into dust. Elias' fists clenched, not in fear, but in fury. Orders screamed to retreat, to hold the line elsewhere, to abandon what could not be saved. Elias heard them, but his body did not obey. The weight of decades surged forward, dragging his legs into fire. His rifle, outdated and scratched, fell alive in his hands again. He moved without enhancements, but memory guided him. Every step precise, every shot deliberate. He slipped through chaos, cutting down Vork scouts with brutal efficiency, his endurance shocking those who glimpse him. "The relic is charging in," one soldier muttered in disbelief. Yet Elias pressed on, each breath sharp, each heartbeat defiant. He had carried armies before. He would carry one warrior now. Reaching Veyrath, Elias braced against fear and fired point-blank into the swarm, forcing them back long enough to kneel beside the wounded general. His choice was clear. He would not abandon another. Not again. Not while he still breathed. Veyrath's golden eyes blazed with fury and confusion as Elias bent down. Acid hissed nearby, the air thick with screams, but Elias ignored it. With a grunt, he forced the massive general onto his back. The weight nearly crushed him, yet his legs held. Soldiers who had fled turned, stunned by the sight. A fragile, gray-haired human carrying the mightiest Threxel alive. Veyrath struggled to speak, his pride cutting deeper than his wounds. "Why?" he rasped. Elias said nothing at first, only gritted teeth in iron resolve. At last his words cut through, because someone has to. For Veyrath, shame was sharper than pain, but disbelief followed. This human could have run, could have lived, yet chose to bear him instead. The symbolism struck like thunder, strength carried not by muscle, but by loyalty. The swarm roared, but the battlefield shifted in that single image, frailty bearing greatness. Each step became war. Vorks lunged from shadows, their claws slicing air. Elias fired in bursts, scavenging discarded rifles, rigging explosives from shattered crates. He turned wreckage into walls, funnels, traps that slowed the tide. Veyrath, barely conscious, felt each jolt of movement as the old soldier twisted survival from scraps. Smoke and fire blurred vision. Acid hissed against metal, yet still Elias moved. His body trembled under weight, knees threatening collapse but will held him upright. He had nothing but endurance, and endurance proved enough. The swarm pressed harder, shrieking in waves, but each ambush Elias crafted brought another breath, another step closer to safety. He did not fight like a machine. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to prove. Survival was not granted. It was carved, one desperate heartbeat at a time, through fire, teeth, and shadow. The path bled into ruins, bodies human and Threxel scattered alike. Elias staggered, sweat mixing with ash. Veyrath stirred against his back, his voice rough. "You are frail, yet you endure." Elias barked a laugh, bitter and tired. Frailty outlasts arrogance more often than you'd think. Their words cut like blades, sharp with mockery, yet beneath them something shifted. Veyrath, raised to despise weakness, saw strength he had no words for. Elias, burdened by decades of scorn, felt no triumph, only grim necessity. Respect did not bloom in warmth but in fire, grudging and raw. Between them, amid the ruin, an understanding took root. Humanity's strength was not power, nor speed, nor augmentation. It was a refusal to die quietly. Varath's pride bent, if only slightly. Elias' burden grew no lighter, but his resolve grew heavier still. Together, battered and unlikely, they pressed onward to the ashes of war. Ash drifted like snow across a landscape broken by war. The earth of Zereth Prime was soaked in blood and oil, littered with the wreckage of shattered machines and the twisted bodies of soldiers who had once believed themselves unbreakable. The sky glowed red from burning ships, their husks streaking downward like falling stars. Elias moved carefully through the carnage, each step measured under the weight of Varath on his back. The general's breast came ragged, hot against his neck, but still he clung to life. Shadows moved in the smoke. Vorik scouts, lean and swift, stalked the edges of vision. Their insectoid eyes glowed faintly, unblinking, waiting for weakness. Elias tightened his grip on a scavenge rifle, shifting Varath's bulk to one shoulder as he steadied his aim. A burst of gunfire cracked through the silence, scattering the nearest predators. They shrieked, not in fear but in warning, their cries echoing across the broken fields. Every step forward demanded vigilance. The swarm was never gone, merely hidden, watching. The terrain itself betrayed them, ground collapsing into trenches filled with bodies, smoke choking the lungs. Elias felt exhaustion press against his ribs, but he forced his legs onward. Behind the veil of death, the killing fields whispered a truth. Survival here was not about strength, but about refusing to stop walking. Technology had failed the Alliance. Plasma turrets burned out. Drones fell from the sky hacked by Vorik's instincts, and energy shields collapsed under acid. Yet Elias carried with him something the swarm had not evolved to counter: memory. He guided Varath behind a shattered transport, lowering the general gently before pulling wires from its wrecked hull. A moment's work, a twist of metal, and the corpse of the machine became a trap. When a Vorik scout skittered close, its talons sliced through the wire, sparking an explosion that blew the creature into pieces. Elias allowed himself a grim smile. Primitive, yes. Effective, more so. Where young soldiers fought with doctrine, he fought with experience. He used smoke to mask their path, flares to draw enemies away, and discarded helmets as decoys in the dirt. Each trick was older than the war itself, scraps of knowledge forged in forgotten battles when humans had little but their wits. Varath, half-conscious, muttered with disbelief as he watched a swarm of smaller Voriks impale themselves on sharpened debris Elias had arranged. You fight as if the world itself bends for you. Elias shook his head, voice flat. The world bends to no one, but it can be tricked into giving you a second chance. The monsters pressed harder, but each step forward was bought with cunning. What machines could not do, the stubborn ingenuity of a human could. By the second day, thirst gnawed deep in fear. Supplies had been lost in the retreat, and the canteen strapped to Elias' side was half empty. He paused behind a broken ridge, shoulders shaking under Varath's weight. His throat burned for water, but the general's wounds festered, heat rising off him in waves. Elias unhooked the canteen. The metal was cool in his hand, precious beyond gold. He hesitated, eyes drawn to the liquid inside, then pressed it to Varath's lips. The Threxel stirred, attempting to turn away. Not for me, he rasped. I am already finished. Elias forced it into his mouth. Drink, or neither of us makes it. The water disappeared in gulps, leaving Elias' own lips cracked and dry. Hunger followed soon after. Rations scavenged from the dead barely stretched between them. What little food remained he placed in Varath's clawed hand. Starvation hollowed his gut, each step heavier than the last. Yet he refused to falter. Sacrifice became survival, and survival became choice. Each mouthful given away toward his strength. But Elias had long since accepted the price of carrying another. The question lingered in silence. Was survival worth it if it meant abandoning someone who could not walk? For Elias, the answer remained firm. Humanity endured because it refused to abandon those who could not keep pace. As the hours dragged on, silence grew heavy. At last, Varath broke it. His voice was low, stripped of command. Among my people, weakness is death. To be carried is dishonor beyond words. My soldiers, they did what they were taught. To bear a broken general is to share his shame. His words carried no anger now, only bitter truth. His golden eyes burned with humiliation deeper than the acid that scarred his scales. They fled not from cowardice alone, but from tradition. I was no longer their general once I fell. I was a corpse that had not yet stopped breathing. Elias shifted him higher on his shoulders, feeling the tremor in the Threxel's body. "Sounds like a poor way to keep friends," he muttered. Vaerath's claws curled weakly. Honor demands strength. Weakness cannot lead. That is why they left. The admission cracked something in his armor. The general who had once roared commands across the battlefield now lay in silence, shame heavier than his wounds. His culture demanded perfection. Anything less was discarded. Elias did not argue yet. He only carried the weight, letting the alien's confession hang in the smoke. For the first time, Vaerath's pride seemed less like steel and more like glass, cracked and ready to break. Later, as night cloaked the battlefield, Elias finally answered. His voice was rough, worn with age. "Where I come from, strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. And if you can't stand, someone stand for you." Vaerath listened in silence, his eyes half closed. Elias continued. "I've seen men stay behind so others could escape. I've seen soldiers give their last breath so someone else had one more chance. They weren't perfect, and most didn't live to be remembered, but they mattered because they didn't quit on each other." He adjusted the rifle slung at his side, gaze scanning the shifting shadows. "You call weakness a stain. I call it proof we're alive. You bleed, you stumble, you fail, but someone carries you anyway. That's what makes us worth something." The words cut deeper than Elias realized. For a Threxel raised on ideals of unbroken strength, the thought was alien. Vaerath's honor had always been measured in victories and scars worn like trophies. But here, carried by a man with nothing but endurance, another measure revealed itself. Loyalty without condition. Vaerath's silence stretched long, but his eyes no longer burned with shame. They carried something else now, something almost like understanding. The road bled into memory. Every step stirred ghosts Elias had buried long ago. He remembered trenches filled with mud and bone, leaders who abandoned men for strategy charts, and friends who never returned from charges that achieved nothing. His youth had been forged in war, each scar etched by betrayal and survival. He had once been a promising officer, until disillusion stripped the shine from his uniform. Too many lives wasted for pride. Too many orders followed that cost more than they gained. When the wars ended, he turned his back on glory. He bought a farm, planted crops, and learned the silence of soil instead of screams. To others, it looked like defeat. To Elias, it was survival of another kind, a choice to live when death had already taken too much. Now, carrying Vaerath, the ghosts returned not as tormentors, but as reminders. Every betrayal taught him why he could not abandon this alien general. Every scar whispered the cost of walking away. He had carried the weight of memory alone for years. Now he carried another's life, and strangely, it felt lighter than the past. Vaerath stirred again, his voice softer this time. "Your scars, they do not make you less. They make you more." His tone carried no mockery now, only the faint tremor of revelation. He studied Elias' weathered face, etched by years of battles both fought and fled. Among the young there is speed, there is strength, but among the old there is patience, and patience wins wars. Elias did not respond immediately. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, eyes fixed forward. "Age doesn't make me wise. It just means I've survived mistakes the young haven't made yet." Vaerath's gaze lingered, as if weighing the truth. Perhaps survival is its own kind of wisdom. For the first time, respect edged his words, not the former respect of rank, but the reluctant kind born of shared fire and ash. The bond was fragile, yet undeniable. Elias no longer carried only a wounded alien general. He carried a warrior who began to see worth beyond his own culture's rigid measure. The distance between them shrank with every step, not in body but in spirit. Somewhere between battle and exhaustion, respect forged itself into iron. The horizon burned brighter with every passing hour. Fires from the last stronghold of the Alliance lit the sky, their desperate glow cutting through the smoke. Elias knew the fortress was more than stone and steel. It was the last rallying point, the final chance to hold Zereth Prime. Without it, the swarm would sweep unopposed across the galaxy. But the Vorts were moving faster. Scouts multiplied, shadows gathering into rivers of chitin. Their cries echoed across the ruins, a chorus of hunger drawing tight around the fortress walls. The swarm had smelled blood, and they would not stop until every survivor was consumed. Elias' knees buckled under the weight, his lungs raw with ash. Still he forced himself onward. Each step of defiance shouted into the void. Veyrath pressed one claw against his shoulder, his voice faint but steady. You carry more than me. Human, you carry the last ember. The swarm closed, their screeches split in the air, but Elias did not falter. He pushed forward with broken body and failing strength, his will burning hotter than the fires in sky. Humanity's defiance lived in every staggering step. Unyielding, unbroken, and unwilling to surrender. The fortress loomed like a dying star, its shield sputtering as clawed limbs slammed against their fading glow. The Vorks hammered endlessly, their shrieks reverberating through steel walls and broken skies. Within, soldiers braced for collapse, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. It was then that the gates opened, and through the haze staggered Elias Kane. His frame, bent and trembling, carried a weight greater than flesh alone. Draped across his back was Veyrath, the Threxel general whom all had believed lost. Every step Elias took seemed impossible, his boots dragging across scorched ground, his body soaked in blood, both his own and another's. Soldiers froze in disbelief, whispers cutting through the roar of the siege. Those who had mocked him as useless stared wide-eyed, their jeers dying on their lips. He stumbled across the threshold, knees threatening to give, yet he did not let Veyrath fall. The gates slammed shut behind them, the last barrier against annihilation. Silence fell for a moment, heavy and disbelieving. The impossible had walked through their walls, a frail human who bore a titan of war. Then, as Elias finally collapsed to his knees, still holding the general upright, the silence broke. Not with laughter or doubt, but with a stunned intake of breath that rippled through the ranks. Against the backdrop of fire and claws, a new story began to write itself in the eyes of every soldier who witnessed him. The sight spread like a spark in dry tinder. Word leapt from soldier to soldier, carried on whispers that refused to die. The old man had brought back the general. The relic had borne what no one else could. In that moment, shame turned its blade inward. The young who had fled now saw their cowardice reflected in stark contrast. They had left Veyrath to die, yet the weakest among them had carried him through the jaws of the swarm. All replaced doubt, growing into something fiercer. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet Elias' gaze as medics rushed forward. Others clenched their fists, the weight of disgrace igniting a spark of determination. They had nearly surrendered to despair, but despair now felt like betrayal in the face of what they had seen. Even wounded and gasping, Elias radiated defiance no augmentation could mimic. The lines of his face, carved by time and war, told a story louder than any speech. Veyrath, though bloodied and broken, remained alive, a symbol that strength had not abandoned them. And the one who had ensured it was no towering warrior, no brilliant strategist, but a man dismissed as too slow, too fragile, too old. Across the fortress, murmurs swelled into chants, soldiers finding their voices again. "The strong back," some whispered in Threxel tongue, the phrase laced with reverence. A legend was not born in triumph, but in the stubborn refusal to fall. As healers struggled to patch his wounds, Veyrath rose with effort, leaning against Elias for strength. His body trembled, but his voice carried the weight of fire and iron. "You call me general," he declared, his gaze sweeping across human and Threxel alike. "But today, I am not your strength. Today, I am the one who is carried." A murmur swept through the ranks, uneasy and uncertain. Veyrath pressed on, his voice gaining thunder. "This human," mocked his relic, "bore me across the fields of death when none of you dared. His back held not only my life, but the hope of us all. Tell me, what strength is greater than to give everything for another?" Eyes dropped, fists clenched. Shame burned across faces both human and alien. But with it came something else, resolve. Elias, silent beside him, did not bask in glory. His head bowed, his breath ragged, yet his presence was undeniable. Veyrath lifted a clawed hand, pointing toward him. Strength is not youth, nor power, nor perfection. Strength is loyalty. Strength is sacrifice. And if this frail man can defy the swarm with nothing but will, then so can every one of us. A roar erupted, soldiers striking armor and weapons against stone. Human and Threxel voices mingled, their cries carrying through the fortress. Despair had melted into unity, and unity into fury. A tide was turning, not of the swarm but of the defenders who would not yield. The fortress gates opened once more, not to retreat, but to unleash defiance. Humans in exosuits surged forward beside Threxel warriors clad in scaled armor, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Plasma rifles spat bolts of fire, energy blades cut arcs of light, and heavy cannons thundered as the charge began. The Vorax met them with screeches, their tide vast as an ocean, but this time the defenders did not break. Shoulder to shoulder, species that had once distrusted each other fought as one. Human soldiers laid down suppressive fire, while Threxel charged with brutal melee strikes, their blades tearing through carapace. Explosions shook the ground, filling the air with smoke and fire. For every soldier that fell, another stepped into their place, driven by the vision of a frail man who refused to quit. Elias stood at the rear, weapon in trembling hands, watching his allies surge with newfound strength. Pride swelled in his chest, tempered by grim reality. The swarm was endless, each wave heavier than the last, yet something had shifted. Fear no longer dominated the fortress. Hope did. The battle became a storm of metal and claws, light and shadow. Screams mingled with roars, plasma with acid, honor with defiance. The swarm pressed. But the defenders pressed harder, no longer fractured but bound by a unity stronger than steel. The countercharge was not just survival, it was declaration. Humanity and Threxel would not go quietly into extinction. The battle raged, yet Elias could not stand idle. Despite blood loss and exhaustion, he refused the hands that urged him to rest. He strapped on a discarded rifle, his limbs trembling but his eyes fierce. "I've marched too far to stop now," he muttered, more to himself than to any listener. He stepped into the fray, his frail body dwarfed by towering insectoid horrors. Claws raked the ground, acid hissed against stone. Yet Elias moved forward, firing with steady resolve. Every shot was placed with precision, honed by decades of instinct. He was no longer a forgotten mule. He was the soldier he had always been. Younger troops watched in shock as the old man pushed past them, leading a small squad into the thickest of the swarm. His pace was uneven, his body screaming with pain, but his will carved a path through fear. Soldiers followed, ashamed to let him march alone. Elias fought not for glory, but to draw the swarm's gaze. Each step was a dare, each breath a defiance. The Vorax turned toward him, lured by the audacity of a man who should have fallen long ago. His march became a beacon, not of strength, but of willpower unyielding. This was not youth's charge. It was age's final stand. Elias led the diversion deeper into chaos, his every movement drawing more of the Vorax tide. He planted explosives scavenged from fallen allies, wiring them into choke points between ruins. With practiced efficiency, he herded the swarm, forcing their vast numbers into bottlenecks. Each trap detonated with bone-shaking force, shredding waves of insectoid bodies. The swarm screamed in fury, driven harder by hunger. Acid burned across his arm, claws tore his armor, but Elias pressed forward. He fought with desperation tempered by cunning, his mind calculating survival even as his body begged for rest. He led them not to victory for himself, but to a place where others could strike. Behind him, the Alliance seized a chance. Tanks unleashed barges. Threxel champions cleaved through weakened lines, and plasma artillery rained fire from the walls. Every second Elias bought gave them another step toward survival. He stumbled, blood dripping freely, yet his eyes remained fixed ahead. Veyrath's words echoed in his ears. Strength and loyalty, strength and sacrifice. Elias embodied both. The swarm pressed tight, seeking to consume him whole, but he did not falter. With one final trigger pulled, a chain of detonations roared across the battlefield. Fire and collapse swallowed the swarm's heart, crushing their momentum beneath rubble and flame. Elias fell to his knees, breath ragged, yet the enemy tide broke around him. When the smoke cleared, silence fell. The swarm's endless advance had been shattered, their bodies piled high in grotesque heaps. The fortress still stood, though its walls were scorched and bleeding. Survivors staggered back through gates, their weapons smoking, their armor cracked. Victory had been claimed, but it came wrapped in ruin. Thousands lay dead across the fields, their sacrifice etched into scorched earth. Cities smoldered in the distance, reduced to ash. Children would grow without parents, leaders without nations. The cost was unbearable, yet it had been paid. In the center of it all knelt Elias, his body broken. Medics rushed to him, but their frantic hands could not mask the truth. He had given more than flesh could bear. His chest rose shallowly, each breath a battle in itself. Around him, soldiers gathered. Humans and Threxel alike bowed their heads, not in mourning, but in reverence. The old man who had been mocked, forgotten, and discarded had become the symbol of their survival. He had drawn the swarm into death's jaws and bought their victory with his own. The price of survival was written in blood, and Elias had paid it willingly. As the fortress walls sealed once more, silence grew heavy. Elias lay upon the ground, his breath shallow, his vision dim. Around him, the whispers grew into something stronger, a chant carried on both human tongues and Threxel voices. They called him not Relic, not Mule, but the strong back. Veyrath, though scarred and weak, knelt beside him. His voice trembled but carried pride. You showed us strength not bound to muscle or speed. You showed us that true power is found in loyalty, in sacrifice, in the refusal to bend. His gaze swept the gathered ranks. Remember this man, for it is his act, not mine, that turned despair into victory. Elias' eyes fluttered, his lips curving in the faintest smile. He had not fought for glory, nor for remembrance. He had fought because someone needed to be carried, and he had chosen to carry them. That was enough. In that moment, strength was redefined across two species. Not the perfection of youth, not the enhancement of machines, not the superiority of alien blood, but the unyielding will of a single human heart. As the fires smoldered and the swarm retreated into silence, the legend of Elias Kane was born, not as hero or conqueror, but as the stubborn, fragile, and indomitable proof of what humanity could be. The battle ended, but Elias bore the scars more deeply than any. His body, racked with wounds, no longer obeyed as it once had. The strength that carried giants across burning fields now faltered under its own weight. He moved with difficulty, his frame twisted by pain, yet his eyes never dimmed. Those who saw him expected despair, but none came. Instead, there was the same stubborn spark that had carried him through the killing fields. He did not mourn the loss of mobility. He had given all he had, and what remained was not weakness, but proof of endurance. Where others saw ruin, Elias saw a reminder that the spirit is unyielding even when flesh breaks. Around him, soldiers found courage, their gazes drawn not to what he had lost, but to what he still radiated. His presence reminded them that survival itself was victory. The Threxel gathered in solemn ceremony, their banners heavy with ash and triumph. At the center, Veyrath stood tall despite his wounds, voice carrying through the vaulted chamber. He spoke of honor, not his own, but of the human who had carried him across death's threshold. In our culture, Veyrath declared, strength is measured by what one can bear. None among us have borne what this man has. His clawed hands lifted a ceremonial brand of steel and stone, etched with the sigils of their warrior caste. From this day, Elias Kane is named the strongest back. The words resonated deeper than any cheer. Threxel bowed their heads, acknowledging not a warrior of their blood, but one who embodied their highest virtue. Humans watched in silence, realizing they were witnessing history, an alien people binding their legacy to one of Earth. Elias bowed not in pride, but in humility. From ashes of distrust rose something unexpected. Humans and Threxel, who once exchanged suspicion in every word, now stood shoulder to shoulder. Where once alliances had been ink on fragile treaties, they became steel forged in sacrifice. The tale of the strongest back spread swiftly through the ranks, binding fractured spirits into one. Together they raised a banner, half human insignia, half Frexel crest. Oh, the fortress that had nearly fallen. It fluttered in wind tainted by smoke, a fragile promise against the endless swarm. Soldiers gazed upon it with reverence, not for the cloth, but for what it represented. Elias Burden had become their foundation. His march across fire and shadow symbolized not just endurance, but trust that neither species could survive without the other. In that shared story, mistrust melted. From one man's sacrifice, an alliance stronger than fear was born, etched into banners and memory alike. In the days after, Elias found himself surrounded not by commanders or dignitaries, but by the young. Soldiers scarcely past you sought him out, human and Frexel alike. They did not come asking how to aim a rifle, nor how to strike at armored flesh. Instead, they asked how he endured. What gave you strength when all was lost? One Frexel recruit whispered. How did you not give in? Asked a human barely grown. Elias answered with quiet honesty. Strength, he told them, was not born from rage or skill, but from refusing to abandon those who needed him. He gave them no speeches of glory, no promises of triumph. Only the truth, that greatness is found in carrying burdens others cannot. They listened with reverence, their eyes wide, and in their faces, Elias saw hope that his scars had planted seeds stronger than fear. When the fortress grew quiet, Elias often sat among ruins that still smoked. The chants had faded, the banners hung still, and silence returned heavier than battle. He thought not of honors, nor the names carved into stone for victory. Instead, his mind drifted to faces long gone, friends who had fallen in wars before, comrades whose laughter had been silenced by fire. He carried them all in memory, just as he had carried Veyrath across the fields. The galaxy celebrated him as legend, yet he did not wear it as pride. He whispered the names of the lost, each syllable a prayer. His survival was not for songs or statues. It was because when someone needed him, he could not turn away. That, he believed, was the only legacy worth keeping. Quiet humility became his crown, and in silence his shadow stretched long. Elias' story spread far beyond the battlefield, across human colonies. Mothers told children of the soldier who carried giants on his back. On Frexel homeworlds, warriors whispered his name as proof that endurance was strength greater than steel. His legend crossed stars faster than ships, binding distant worlds in shared respect. To soldiers, Elias became symbol of survival, not through conquest, but through stubborn refusal to yield. To leaders, he became warning and reminder. Alliances endure only when trust is shared, when sacrifice is not demanded of one alone. Elias himself lived quietly, avoiding grandeur, yet his tale moved through galaxies, reshaping hearts more surely than weapons. It was not his body that endured, but the spirit behind it. Long after his voice stilled, the strongest back will remain not flesh and bone, but idea, a truth none could erase. The war was not ended. The swarm still lingered, shadows stretching beyond burning horizons. Yet for the first time, humanity and Frexel stood together not as allies of necessity, but as kin forged by sacrifice. Elias rested at last, his frail body eased into silence while dawn's light touched the fortress walls. He did not dream of medals or songs. He watched the rising sun and felt content, knowing he had carried his share of the burden. Beyond ruin stretched possibility, bittersweet yet real. Hope had been born from ashes, and for now, that was enough. The war receded into memory, yet Elias returned not to monuments or medals, but to soil. His farmstead waited, untouched by the storm of galactic strife. Fields stretched beneath the same endless sky, rows of earth steady and familiar. His body bore scars, each step slower than before, yet the rhythm of life felt unchanged. He rested his hands on rough wood and breathed deeply of the quiet air. For the first time in years, peace was not a dream, but a fragile, living truth. Beyond his fields, the galaxy carried his story like wildfire. Soldiers in distant barracks repeated the tale of the old human who bore a general across burning worlds. Merchants spoke it in marketplaces, and alien scholars recited it in academies where war was dissected. His name moved without his presence, reshaping thought of honor and strength. Where once humanity was dismissed as fragile, whispers now carried awe. Elias Kane had become myth, though he never sought it. One evening, Elias lifted his gaze to the stars, their light steady despite the darkness between. Countless battles flickered in his memory, victories carved in blood and failure etched in silence. Yet as he stared upward, doubt crept quietly. Were weapons truly humanity's greatest strength, or was it their refusal to yield when collapse seemed inevitable? He did not know if the galaxy understood that truth yet, but he hoped they would, before the stars demanded another price. The hum of machinery broke the night stillness. A courier drone descended, its lights glowing against a farmstead's dark soil. Elias felt the weight of its presence before it landed, the sealed communique already heavy in his hand. The message bore grim tidings. New war fronts igniting on the edges of map space, shifting alliances fraying under suspicion, whispers that the Vorix hive was evolving. Words on a screen carried the thunder of marching legions. Though his days of battle were over, the galaxy had not quieted. The horizon trembled, promising storms yet to come, and Elias stood silent beneath the burden of knowing. Elias did not rush to answer the message. The soil beneath his boots felt steadier than any starship deck, and he knew his body could not bear another war. Yet his story no longer belonged to him alone. Across human colonies and Threxel strongholds, young soldiers drew strength from his legend, vowing to carry burdens he no longer could. To the weary, his tale was a reminder that endurance mattered more than glory. As dawn painted the horizon gold, Elias leaned on his cane and watched light spill across his fields. The future was uncertain, the war unfinished, but hope endured. A legend had been born, and it walked ahead of him into tomorrow.